Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're looking at Mexico's problems in its relationship with President-elect Donald Trump, be it over trade or immigration. We're in the company of James Lacey, delegate from California for Donald Trump at the Republican convention. He's the author of Taxifornia, joins us from Los Angeles. From Mexico City, John Ackerman, who teaches at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. From Washington, Juan Carlos Hidalgo of the Cato Institute's Center for Global Liberty and Prosperity. And from Washington, Pedro da Costa of the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Lots of reactions on the hashtag F24 debate. Dan on Facebook, already making U.S. companies rethink their business plans when considering cheaper markets like Mexico, perhaps reversing the trend started by NAFTA nearly 2 decades ago. So the idea is that that could work in the U.S.'s favor. But James Lacey, I want your reaction to something Pedro da Costa said just before the break, how Mexico came to the rescue of the U.S. car industry.
I'm not exactly of the opinion that Mexico came to the rescue. I can say that the trade relationship with respect to the loss of U.S. manufacturing jobs isn't just focused on Mexico. And I think we had some discussion about that earlier. We're having a discussion now about U.S. trade with Mexico, but the issue that Trump brings forward of the loss of manufacturing jobs has a whole lot to do with more than just Mexico. It includes China. The word ridiculous came up a little bit earlier in the relationship between Mexico and the United States. And I want to tell you what's ridiculous. What's ridiculous is that Juan Francisco Lopez Sanchez shot and killed Kate Steinle in San Francisco on July 1st, 2015, after he had been deported from the United States 5 times. But because of San Francisco's sanctuary city policy, which is a policy that many urban areas in the United States hold, it's a policy that allows local officials to ignore informing the deportation officials about the presence of criminals in their cities. Because of these policies, and because of the misread by liberal Democrats in the United States about how to deal with this terrible problem of illegal immigration.
Right, but James Lacey, that's a different conversation, isn't it? That's a conversation about
it's related to the overall, and let me tell you why. Trump understands that 80% of Mexican exports, 80% come to the United States. Trade is related to the resolution of all the issues that the United States has with Mexico. And this is why you hear the Trump administration saying, and Mexico's going to pay for that wall. The whole range of issues with Mexico, it's not just trade. It's illegal immigration. It's threats to our national security in the United States.
But in the case you just mentioned, it's the beef you have, if I understand this correctly, in the case you just mentioned, is with the United States' own laws when it comes to prosecuting criminals. It has nothing to do with Mexico.
But it has a lot to do with Mexico. If a person's been deported 5 times, it takes 2 to tango on a border. There's 2 sides to the 2,000-mile U.S.-Mexican border. The Mexican government isn't doing what it should be doing to be certain that people like Juan Francisco Lopez Sanchez, who is a trafficker in narcotics, are put in jail for the crimes that they committed in Mexico, rather than allowed to come into the U.S. And it affects the trade relationship.
Okay, thank you.
It's one pot.
Okay, we got it. Can I respond?
Sure.
So my point, actually, that speaks perfectly to my previous point, because the reason why trade gets such disproportionate amount of rhetoric to the impact compared to the impact it has on the economy is just because of the anti-immigrant and racist overtones that the campaign has basically been founded on.
And so that.
Let me just finish. So the association, let me just finish.
One at a time, please. One at a time.
I mean, come on, please.
Pedro da Costa.
This is not Fox. This is not Fox. It's French TV. Thank you. So as I was saying, you are conflating trade issues with you are conflating trade issues with a random murder that nobody has heard about without actually giving substantial statistics to show that there's even a disproportionate amount of illegal immigrant-based crime. And just to go back to your previous viewer's point, which was very important, and I'd like to highlight it, that she said on Facebook, this is a direct quote from the Ford CEO, just to make clear just how much President-elect Trump likes to take credit for things that he hasn't actually done. This is the CEO of Ford. He says, in the case of the plant, we go through an ongoing process every year looking at segment changes, and then we do our volume and capacity planning. By late fall, it was very clear we didn't need the capacity, and we made the decision. In other words, the tweet had nothing to do with it. So let's call a spade a spade.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah, John Ackerman.
Yeah, just quickly, I think that Lacey's comments are perfect. That's how I started my intervention in this program, is that exactly these threats and pressures on businesses not to invest in Mexico go along with a broader anti-Mexican and both with Mexicans in south of the border and north of the border. And this is a real threat for the well-being of North America and of Mexicans. And the Mexican government and the Mexican people should respond forcefully and powerfully. That's why it's so sad that we have President Peña Nieto and a new Secretary of Foreign Relations whose only credentials is being a buddy of Trump. This is going to generate an incredible upswell. It already is generating an incredible upswell of indignation and participation in Mexico and among Mexicans in the United States. And I think there's a real possibility that as a response to this open attack on Mexicans on both sides of the border, there's a real response from Mexicans on both sides of the border and their other sectors being solidarity with them to change politics for the better in North America. So we could get a real backlash in the best sense of the form towards democracy and against this kind of oligarchic corporate governance of North America, which is being supported by Trump.
All right, let's talk about this wall, this promise of building a wall. And by the way, in the Mexican border town, known until recently as the world's drug capital, Ciudad Juarez, they've already got one. Residents of the city say they like the one that was built between 2007 and 2010, even if it's not a cure-all.
This won't do anything to stop people trying to cross over again, because they can cross over around that side too. The wall won't stop them, but it does bring greater security, because here things will be calm. Here nothing will happen, but in other places it will.
Juan Carlos Hidalgo, your thoughts about a fence or a wall, is it such a big deal?
It is a big deal, mostly symbolic. As you said, there is already a fence, there are some wall already built along the border. But the promise of building a wall along the 2,000-mile border is not feasible. I mean, you're talking about rough terrain with desert, rivers, cities. So it will require a lot of effort and industry and money to build it. Promising that Mexico will pay for it is demagogic. It's not realistic. It's not going to happen. But the message that it sends to the world, that the United States is encroaching in itself, that it's building walls along its borders, that is trying to prevent people from coming. It goes against even the idea of Ronald Reagan, back in the 1980s. Let's remember that the Chinese city on a hill that President Reagan talked about. He talked about a Chinese city on the hill with a door that was open to people coming to the United States that will work, that will provide for the economy. So I really resent that promise. I don't think it's feasible. I think it was extremely populist. But however, I think it's the tone that Donald Trump has instilled in this campaign, and now that he's going to instill in his upcoming presidency.
So as a result, is the North American Free Trade Agreement going to unravel? What's your prediction on that, Juan Carlos?
Well, we haven't discussed yet. We mentioned a little bit what Mexico could do if the United States goes ahead and starts imposing tariffs on Mexican goods, and is that the Mexico can easily retaliate.
Because we heard John Ackerman in part one of our discussion saying that Mexico should already start to perhaps pivot towards the rest of the Americas.
It's not as easy. It's not as easy. I mean, like, what is it? Like 80, 90% of exports from Mexico go to the United States. It's not as just turning a switch and having those exports going to South America or Central America or even China. It's not, there you have already deep flows between the United States and Mexico. Over $1 billion a day are exchanged between both countries. So it will create a lot of harm if the United States starts messing with this trading relationship. Mexico could retaliate, and that's going to hurt U.S. consumers, and that's going to hurt U.S. exporters.
How could they retaliate?
Let's remember, well, they can impose tariffs on U.S. exports to Mexico. For example, recently they imposed tariffs. A few years ago, they imposed tariffs on Christmas trees from Oregon. Let's remember an episode that happened back in 2000, I think it was 2002, 2003, when the Bush administration imposed tariffs on European steel. The European Union retaliated by imposing tariffs on orange juice from Florida and cheese from Wisconsin, which were swing states for the 2004 election. So Mexico can be really an evil genius. They can rely on an evil genius strategy of picking industries that can be critical for Trump's re-election within 4 years and start imposing tariffs on those industries in order to move the president's hand.
James Lacey, it sounds like ripping up NAFTA, that North American Free Trade Agreement, could be a zero-sum game rather than a win-win situation.
Yes, but the NAFTA issues that Trump raises are not, again, just focused on Mexico. There's a broad basket of issues that we have with Mexico that include trade. And NAFTA has, generally not been the middle class has been the most highly affected unit within the United States. We can go back and forth on the statistics that we've discussed here, but it's the middle class manufacturing jobs that are in decline in the United States. And this is the reason why Trump won those Rust Belt states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. He won those states because in Ohio, he won those states because those are the states that are affected. And of course, he's going to keep up with his campaign promise. I want to mention one thing. It's not racist for Trump. It's not racist for me and Trump supporters to bring out these problems of sanctuary cities and the people that have been murdered and the criminals that are flooding into the United States as a result of this porous border. We have statistics that show that illegal immigration is on the rise right now. DHS released a study in October that said that illegal families coming in from Mexico that include not only Mexicans but Central Americans are up 52%. This is a problem that's not going away.
But hang on, you're saying two things there. Are those people coming in? Are those people coming in?
I had this one point. Donald Trump got a bigger portion of the Latino vote in the United States than Mitt Romney did 4 years ago.
But you're saying two different things here, James. You're saying, I have to ask you this, James. You're saying on the one hand that more illegal aliens are coming in, and you're saying that more of them are criminals, and that's not the same thing.
Certainly if you have an increase, and there has been a skyrocketing increase, 52% according to DHS, as of October in 2016, of course you're going to have within the people that come in the potential that there's more crime. Now let me link it to the crime statistics. There have never been higher crime statistics than this last year. Violent crime is on the rise. In San Francisco, violent crime, killings, petty crimes have been on the rise. The United States had a 2-decade decline in crime.
Right, okay, but that's fine. But you're blaming that on Mexico?
Can I add something?
It is related. However marginally you want to say it, it's not crazy for me to say, the rise in crime is also related in part to the problem of illegal immigration. And this is something that Carlos Hidalgo to address.
There is simply no research or evidence whatsoever that proves that immigrants in the United States have a higher propensity to engage in criminal activities. There's none. I will welcome if the other guests will mention a single paper or a single research that shows this. Immigrants don't have a higher propensity to commit crimes in the United States. They don't have a higher propensity to rely on welfare than US-born people. So This is not, again, this is looking for a scapegoat. Immigrants, I know it's a rallying point for people who feel anxious about the changing configuration of the U.S. population, the fact that Hispanics are rising as a percentage of the U.S. population, and so on. But again, there is no evidence whatsoever that proves. We can start picking, you know, like there was a murder in San Francisco committed by a criminal. We can pick up many cases that shows otherwise. Americans committing crimes in other countries too. So again, let's not look for scapegoats. Let's have a discussion based on evidence,
Juan Carlos,
based on research.
How do you explain what James Lacey said, which is true, that a lot of Latinos did vote for Donald Trump?
That's a very it's a puzzle. A lot of this happened in Florida, and you know I have many theories regarding what might happen. You know, like Latinos can be tough on Latinos, and you know you can have this phenomenon of Latinos who are in the United States who don't want more Latinos to come into the United States. That's very typical of Latinos. One phenomenon that I've noticed. One phenomenon that I've noticed is that for a Hispanic like me, for a Latino, the most difficult airport to enter the United States is always Miami. It's where you get mistreated the most, not by U.S. officers, U.S.-born officers, but by Hispanics. And that's an interesting phenomenon that has to do a lot with. I think that a lot of Hispanics don't want more immigrants coming into the country, and that's why they voted for Trump.
John Ackerman?
First, on that other point, I mean, there's obviously a hyper pro-capitalist neoliberal community among the Cuban emigres, anti-Castro immigrants. That's the real center for that, powerful. But if you look at the Mexican population, they're overwhelmingly Democrat, and overwhelmingly voted also, at least the youth, Mexican youth, voted for Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton. But specifically, I'd like to ask Mr. Lacey, if he has such a problem with migration, why does he think that disinvesting in Mexico will somehow help? If Ford and all the other companies take out their plants from Mexico, what you will get is an incredible increase in the wave of migrants towards the United States, which is supposedly what you're not looking for. So this sounds to me to be an incredibly contradictory policy and goes back to, yes, a scapegoat strategy. This is the same strategies that the Nazis used against the Jews. I really think that Mexicans are playing the same role as a scapegoat.
So now I'm a Nazi?
In the context, of course, in the context of the collapse of the global leadership and of the economy of the United States. I think in the end, it's a good news because the United States has really just fallen off the cliff, and this is a real good opportunity for Mexico and the other countries of Latin America to beef up their national economies and to finally say bye-bye to imperialism. Thank you, Donald Trump.
James Lacey, very briefly.
Yeah, the trade relationship between the U.S. and Mexico is characterized by the U.S. importing natural gas and crude. The majority of the U.S. trade back and forth is about oil, and that's not in the process of being disrupted. That's a very good trade relationship. Then there is agriculture, and the agriculture relationship isn't going to be affected, particularly because of the seasonal nature of it. Americans, U.S. people are going to want tomatoes from Mexico in January when they're not growing them in California at a different time. This whole business is being raised way out of proportion. The fact of the matter is that Donald Trump is focused like a laser beam on keeping manufacturing jobs in the United States. These have been taken by the Chinese, and some of them have been taken by Mexico, and he's trying to reverse that trend.
All right, let's pick up on that point.
Let's
pick up on that point. In Rust Belt cities like Erie, Pennsylvania, workers have high hopes when it comes to Donald Trump's manufacturing policies, most notably his promise, as you just heard, to bring jobs back from overseas.
Do your job, do what you promise, and we are watching. Every bit.
You know, when you talk to a General Electric or you negotiate with a General Electric, they tell you make too much money. They constantly want to beat back your wages for you to keep your job.
Pedro da Costa, how's it going to go for Donald Trump on that score when you see the high expectations from those Rust Belt states?
Well, they're going to be very difficult expectations to meet. Of course, the higher you set them, the greater the potential for a fall. He's claimed that he could get economic growth up to 5%, which we haven't had in since well before the financial crisis, and no economist considers it a feasible rate of growth for an advanced economy like the United States. So there is the risk that if those promises aren't kept at a fairly quick pace, that by the time the midterms come around, that Republicans could be suffering from some remorse and vote differently.
And on the issue of what happens next in terms of the bilateral relationship with Mexico, because right now Trump isn't the president. Once he is in office, how are things going to be with, what's the chemistry going to really be between him and Enrique Peña Nieto?
Well, I think the issue is whether or not Peña Nieto will remain in, for how long he'll remain in power. As your other guest pointed out, he's putting himself in a very tenuous political position, which will strengthen the left and Manuel López Obrador, who's made previous bids for the presidency. And so I'm not sure what the relationship's going to be like, but it's certainly not a good start. And you have to remember, these are two countries that used to fight wars and had territorial disputes. It's taken a long time for us to become best buddies. And it would be very sad to see that unravel.
Pedro da Costa, I want to thank you for joining us from Washington. I want to thank as well Juan Carlos Hidalgo for being with us from the U.S. Capitol, James Lacey in Los Angeles, John Ackerman in Mexico City. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. Now, there's one aspect of this story over the past week that we have not mentioned. Enter James Creedon of Media Watch fame. At the pump in Mexico, the price of gas going up 20%.
And that's huge. I mean, it's only through looking at this today on social media that I got the extent of which this is really hitting people hard. One Twitter user in the US called Marina, who appears to be Mexican-American, is trying to translate the stress of this to American audiences. 1 gallon of gas is the average equivalent to $4, and the minimum wage is approximately $4. This is crazy, she says. And she points to the company in question, the oil company that is behind this hike, Pemex. And she says it's the only gas station in Mexico. Imagine if Chevron, using an American example, was the only gas station and decided that gas was going to rise to $10 a gallon. But I guess the other factor there to take into account that she mentioned is how low the minimum wage is in Mexico. So this is hitting people very hard, and it explains images such as this, where we're seeing angry protests erupting after this 20% hike in gases. You're also seeing protests across the country. This tweet says, citizens in different parts of Mexico taking to the streets to demonstrate their unhappiness over the prices. And you can see there people marching with anti-government protest signs and stuff. And images such as this in rural Mexico, a highway being totally taken over by a huge crowd of people protesting there. What else do we have? Unrest over Mexico gasoline price hikes erupts into looting. There have been reports of looting linked to, I suppose, the economic stresses involved in this price hike. But also, Francois, apparently a lot of fake information circulating on social media, as is often the case. Fake Twitter accounts have been encouraging looting, according to El Universal. Now, they cite the cybercrime police in Mexico, who have detected, according to them, 1,500 fake social media accounts encouraging looting. You'd wonder why. It seems rather bizarre, but that's what El Universal is reporting. And fake images as well of being reported here by one Twitter user. You can see actually that there's Arabic writing in the background here. So somebody clearly took images of unrest in another part of the world and pretended that this is what was happening now in Mexico. So I suppose some of the information circulating on social media to be taken with a grain
with that
of
hashtag
salt.
gasolinazo.
Gasolinazo, which I'm not quite sure if gasolinaz is just petrol, right? But I guess people making their sentiments felt through that. This is just one final image or series of images. Petrol country, but the people without money. In other words, I suppose some people are making money out of petrol, and this person,
a major oil producer.
That's right, but that perhaps a lot of people not feeling that trickle down effect. So there you go, Francois. Lots of images on social media of Mexicans angry about this situation.
All right, many thanks for that,
Thanks,
James
Francois.
Creedon. Well, we want to thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate. Stay with us. There's more to come.